Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, the geopolitical impact on your cloud strategy. Need a plan B. My name is Jakob Tapper and joining me today I have Mattias Persson, CTO at Managed Services at Iver, and Johan Kristensson, founder of Klura. Glad to have you both here. All good today, Johan?
Yeah, for sure. Excited about the chat.
Excellent. Yeah, very much so. This is very important topic, so I look forward to talking about this.
Great. A lot of things is going on in the world right now, and recently we have seen major geopolitical shifts, not least the relationship between Europe and the US. Today on the webinar, we will discuss how these happenings impact the cloud strategies of Nordic companies. Can we rely on American cloud providers going forward? Johan, authorities in both Norway and Denmark have called for exit strategies from US clouds and prepare for plan B. Can you give us an overview of the situation right now?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. So much is happening in the market right now. I think we're all kind of sort of suffering from a little bit of whiplash of what's going on this week. But let me take it one step back. I think that, you know, the three of us have grown up in a market where globalism has been dominating, so to speak, right? Where ultimately resources have been used in a great way, and we kind of expect that things are getting better every year. You know, real wages are getting better, and stability in general. I actually think that ended yesterday, the way we know it anyway. As retaliations and so forth happened, as far as the trade war goes on, it diminishes, trust. And trust is everything for trade, but trust is also everything for, everything else that goes on between us in a nation, right? And that can actually lead to other aspects as well. For example, we've had this happen once before where, it was actually President Hoover in 1930 who had, it's called like the Hawley suit tariffs that came in. And, there's of course, an easy way to say that, it's going to help us out if we do some form of protectionism. But we've learned through history that it's actually quite dangerous to do so. At that time, we thought that that's going to help the U.S. economy, but ultimately it led to actually contributing to something much worse, which happened during the 1930s, right? So I think that, saying that, I think we need to see the facts for what they are. And I think it's important that we do that from a strategic perspective in investments in IT, which is usually a long-term thing, right? But if you take away the whole trade war aspect that's happening right now, this change in the market started like 10 years ago. We kind of sort of in Europe, I think, slept through a little bit this thing about Crimea, for example. But today, of course, we got Ukraine, we got Israel, we got sensitivity in Taiwan, and then coming back to the U.S. again, where you have somebody like Mette, who's the Prime Minister of Denmark, having phone calls, being threatened over land. I think it was just 2 weeks ago where actually Trump said that, we're going to get Greenland one way or the other. And of course, that sets up a stage of mistrust in a big way, which adds to, of course, those tariffs. So ultimately, you have Canada, you have Panama, and all of these things happening. I think that leads to two things. One thing is the sensitivity or vulnerability in our society. That's going to drive certain aspects of what's going to happen with our government. It could be everything from us creating an app that could take down a whole country to people like myself that has, I think we can all remember, the phrase, nobody has been fired for buying IBM. We built a culture of this, right, to build in certain dependencies, which now Denmark is noticing bigger than, for example, Sweden, to the point about Norway and Denmark, right? And that goes everything from food consumption to, I listened to radio yesterday about, a whole program about water. How do we make sure that that's safe in the future, and how does IT play a role? So you have the vulnerability in society, and then the other aspect is, of course, the competitiveness of Europe. How does Europe continue to compete in case we don't necessarily have certain IT services that are such a basic thing today? 2008, the US and Europe had the same size economy. And Jakob, if you told me, Jan, in 15 years, the US economy will be 50% larger, I would have told you it's physically impossible. Yet it happened. And it all has to do with IT, the digital services and innovation that can come from it, so to speak. So those two aspects, I think that, Europe and the national governments will drive certain agenda to make sure certain things happen. And I think that plays into the role of having, the strategy to plan with that. And I want to emphasize it's more a matter of balance, nation having balance, a company having balance, and flexibility to make sure that you have certain flexibility to take on those whatever balls that are kind of coming your way. So it's a market in flux.
Matthias, you want kind of set the stage here, or the actual, or the present context, so to say. How do these geopolitical shifts, as well as the changes in the market, impact companies' cloud strategies? How should we prepare?
Well, Jakob, I think the short answer to your question is that it will impact. But let us take it back a little bit. The word cloud strategy, I've worked with companies for many years now in terms of in cloud adoption and establishing their kind of IT environments. And I think you'll be surprised, but the cloud strategy isn't always as thought through as it might think for companies, right? Because it has been evolving over years, right? They have bought companies, they divested companies, they have procured SaaS solutions far left and right. They've built digital factories to accelerate innovation on hyperscalers. So you, the point I'm making is that you're sitting today with an environment which is, I'm not going to say out of control, but you're losing a bit of control of it, right? And if you put it into context now, what's happening with the geopolitical situation, it's really about you need to get into control, because you need to get into control so you can maneuver and be flexible. So I think what I'm going to come back to quite a number of times, I think in our discussion today, is that you need to get into control. You need to understand your environment and what you have, and then you need to decide how to take action, where you place your services, and how you place them there. And I think this is what we're going to probably discuss quite a lot today. So it will change. It will impact the cloud strategy if you have a cloud strategy, right? If you don't have one, maybe now is the time to really think through what it is.
Johan, listening to Matthias. What do you see from your standpoint is crucial for let's try to focus on Nordic companies. Here and now. What do you think about regarding what are your thoughts regarding their cloud strategies?
There's an old saying, right, which I think is maybe more valid now than at any ever time before. Don't put all eggs in one basket. It sounds simple, right? But I think it's something that we all can kind of take to us and use in some fashion. I think that, we're all striving to make sure that we bring value to our customers, and innovation and speed and so forth is a big part of that, going forward in the digital layer, so to speak. And I think at this point, we have to think that, okay, with everything going on, I want to make sure I can meet some of those changes that are coming. And if we look at some of the things I said there in the beginning, maybe those are things in around security. We're going to feel a little bit more insecure. Services around the country are getting scrutinized. Government agencies might look into that to say, we have a NISA, of course, NIS 2, maybe NIS 3 will come. Maybe more people will look at a broader set of companies that will have those kind of pressures on them. And I think that if you can then, set yourself up for that flexibility, whether you use, that provider, you want to make sure that you can meet that European angle as well. And some of the values that we believe, this market will drive from the nations, from EU as a whole. And I think that might be just a big aspect of what you want to think about and prepare that.
Hearing you both talk, a hybrid cloud strategy seems to be the way forward, Matthias. Could you walk us through what it means in practice?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jakob, because probably if you ask many of the CIOs today, also in the Nordics, they'll tell you we have a hybrid cloud strategy.
Yeah.
And then you'll ask them, well, what does that mean? And you'll probably get 10 different answers, right?
Yeah.
So let's take it from my perspective, at least. I like to think about the architecture. What does hybrid cloud means? It means that you have choice, flexibility, and that you can move things around. And that calls for an architecture that enables that. It calls for open standards. It calls for not using proprietary services. So all the things that are giving you the ability to actually take things from one place to another. So that's why it's important in the context of this situation, because we're now embarking into a reality where things can change very quickly. We've talked about Denmark and Norway things, but we also have the tariffs, right? We have a global war on tariffs. So what if those goes up 50% tomorrow? What's going to happen to your business if you can't move things, right? So you are in a very volatile situation. Hybrid cloud and hybrid architectures is the answer to giving you that flexibility. And how you do it, I think we can get into more detail, Johan, but we from EVA perspective, we think very much around hybrid in terms of best of both worlds, right? You have cloud providers that gives you edge. You have cloud providers that gives you the European perspective, right? And if you and you make that work to its best of both options, and with hybrid architectures, with that, we think you're in a good place.
And proprietary open source, of course, that works well on both sides, right? So it's more a matter of getting the hybrid in the sense of being able to have the flexibility of moving a workload to where it actually does best, so to speak, whether it's regulatory, security, or just speed or functionality, right?
Yeah, and you're going to have to start thinking about what it means to you to move something and how quickly you need to react. Because in reality, we're not naive, right? We know that you're going to have some things that are going to be pretty stuck where they are, right? But maybe that's okay, because you have made the decisions, you've looked at it, you've got risk analysis of it. That part, if all things go pear-shaped, I can ditch that and put it and build it up somewhere else. But these parts over here, they're the critical parts. That's my core business. That's the almost like the core banking of my company. If prices goes up, or if I'm asked to move that, my company, I'm not going to say goes down, but I'm going to be really in a really difficult situation. So plan B, you need to focus in on these parts, which is critical to your business, and make sure you can maneuver. Yeah.
And may I add to that then, just a little bit from a hybrid perspective then? So, I have something that we call the new hybrid. You mentioned a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And one can define hybrid in different ways. I think that the key message that we want to get out there, this is not about kicking out vendors. This is about finding that balance, right? So you might be using, American providers or other types of providers, right? The key aspect now is then, with some of these changes that are happening in Europe and, Scandinavia as a whole, you want to be prepared for that. And it could be that a European player could actually play into that role even better to create that flexibility, right? So in other words, when we say hybrid, it's not necessarily the standard hybrid like VMware and certain other things that we traditionally have been running, in Europe as a whole. I believe was a number saying 42% of all on-prem runs on VMware, and that might be its own challenges. But what I'm looking for is to say you want to innovate on or on a public cloud, or you might want to use a public cloud in Europe as well. You have a different way of working those, but here you can actually now start to adhere certain things. Whether NIS 3 is coming or something else, you can now move those. Or just take AI as an example, right? You might be running a model, and all of a sudden you're saying that, okay, I want to post-train lots of data. I got 12 petabyte of data. One thing is, of course, I got to put that in a place where it actually works. But then I also want to think, do I get that data back easily? Will it cost me X million to just get it back? What if something changes rapidly? Can I actually get it back quickly enough, right? And some of those questions, which maybe we haven't asked ourselves before, I just think it's critical to ask yourself today. So if you find that cloud provider that can get those aspects in as well, and never, of course, lowering your standard in the sense of innovation and speed, right? But also make sure that you can be prepared for that. Then you can use that best of both worlds, the way you were stating before. And I think call that the new hybrid, so to speak, where you actually go to something modern. And if I if I may just say, so ultimately on the European side, I think we need to be open about there is a gap. If European cloud, if you use that, there might be 1,000 services on an American cloud. There might be 100 or 150 on a European cloud. But there are two ways of working that. One, I think a lot of European clouds today are investing heavily, making sure that they're catching up on that gap. But then there's also a benefit to working a little bit more openly. Like you can use Terraform, you can use Ansible, where you can deploy that everywhere. Many times we want to get the speed in a public cloud, so we kind of deep dive into certain services that kind of locks us in there. Now, you might take a little bit longer on that European cloud because you have to learn certain aspects. But at this point also, your colleagues now have learned a lot, and usually that knowledge is going to play out well, both from a flexibility perspective that we talk about, but also innovation in general in the company, right? Because knowledge is usually something that, moves things forward and in other ways as well.
Hearing you, Matthias, what part of your data can't get stuck? A keyword from you, Johan, is balance, right?
Flexibility.
Okay. I should also add that if there's any question from the audience, please use the chat function that you find in the, wherever you find.
Wherever you find.
Yeah.
That was clear.
Yeah. Matthias, authorities in both Norway and Denmark urge companies to prepare for Plan B. A Plan B is something we hear more and more about. Easier said than done, perhaps, but to be concrete, how do you think companies should go about starting and realizing a Plan B?
So continue a little bit on what we've discussed and around the way I look at it. It's all about you have your assets, you have your data, you have it in places, in locations, built on certain mechanisms, on certain technology. You need to understand that, and you need to do an assessment of what that is and what the risk is, what's the lock-in effect that you have. So that's going to give you a view of your current estate. We in Ever, we actually have a method and a framework developed for this. So we go in and we help the clients to do this kind of run through. It's a fairly short activity. We kind of scratch the surface, but we give companies a good view of their estate, and we use our expertise in compliance and regulatory to also do that risk assessment. That gives you a view of what you've got. Then you can start to look at what the options are, right? Because you're going to have areas where, like I said before, low risk, high cohesion, high lock-in effect, but I'm not going to do anything. Okay, check. But this area over here, like I said, okay, well, I've built this on VMware technology. It runs my core banking. It can only run on this and this underlying infrastructure. Not so good to be. Maybe I should containerize this. Maybe I should move this to Kubernetes. It's going to be a bit of an investment, but the risk reduction I'm getting and the payoff long term is when I get flexibility. So we're going to come out of this, so to say, understanding with all these options that I call them Plan B. Once you look at that, you're also going to say, okay, well, what platforms do I have in my kind of basement to put things on? Well, I don't really have a European option today. What do I do? Should I sit and wait until I need one, or should I already now start to maybe try some of this? And I think we're very much emphasizing it's time to act now. It doesn't have to be a high cost, but you need to get yourself thinking, and you need to get yourself tested on this, because as you were on to, there is a little bit of a mind shift change when you're operating in this manner. Maybe from, if you say full-fledged hyperscalers, you have everything serverless, click, 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 you're up and running very quickly. That's why it's so good, because you get so much speed and agility. When you work with open source, you need to prepare a little bit more, get the foundation a little bit more in place, What's maybe my Kubernetes layer? What are my services? But once you get that foundation in place, you're good to roll, right? So all of these things come together in terms of what we think about as a plan B. But it's definitely time to act now from our perspective. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Johan?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is, of course, try to find what's out there. I kind of find that, we tend to like all go one way, right? And it kind of blocks us to some extent. Maybe actually do that research. There are a lot of options out there, and actually has been a lot of options out there. We just not really felt like it's given us maybe that innovation or speed or whatever we feel that maybe other clouds has given us, right? But I don't want to make plan B either just about this thing, you need an option because the government's going to say this, or we got a trade war and stuff like that either, right? I do see there's a competitiveness as well, right? And there's, of course, again, the one egg in one basket. But I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago, I got a chance to go down to Berlin and have a speech in front of a crowd of car manufacturers, right? And I drove down there with my Volvo, which had just changed to Google. And I think that when we talk about like a plan B, never forget the competitiveness, right? So in this speech, it was all about, okay, so in our cars in Europe, now if we're giving up the software and the digital side, many times it also means maybe we don't get the data out of that. Maybe we're not the best at analyzing that data. And somehow the value many times lies in that data. I think it's something that we need to work on much better in Europe, Scandinavia. And ultimately, if you do that, then on the other side, of course, you can ask the Chinese, they're making cars that are equally good today, but for half price. And then last question of that is, how in the world are we going to compete? And a large part of this is, of course, if we don't have that side of the manufacturing side, which I'm not sure Europe or the US actually can bring back, right? But the big one that we can do something about is this side, where software needs to be invested in. And when you do invest in that, you invest in that knowledge, so to speak, which a European cloud will force you to do a little bit more. That, I believe, will also allow you to do other things. It's easier for us now just to only just take the easy route. Well, listen, I'll use Google, I'll use something else. Nothing bad about those companies, but if you want to drive your own innovation on that, maybe you need to also be able to innovate in the underlying layers, meaning that it's not just that we have a checkbox and, we innovate on somebody else's innovation. That teaches you a lot, and that knowledge, I think, is something that Europe needs to continue to work on. So getting the full stack, understanding what's going on, and combining that, of course, with the best of the fast public clouds that are out there that you're probably already using in some shape or form. So it's both sides. Plan B is, of course, there's a lot of things going on in the market, but don't forget about the innovation side of that. Like, you probably want to continue to invest in that knowledge and so forth that we might not have as a foundation in Europe. Because we rely heavily, the dependencies on a knowledge level, also very heavily on public clouds. And slowly we're diminishing our own, lower level knowledge, so to speak.
Yeah, and just I think the from my perspective also, the topics I'm talking about, that we're talking about here today, we're not waking up to them just because of what's happening in the geopolitical situation. These are things that we're talking to clients about for a long time, right? It is about getting control of your environment, understanding your costs. You got costs going up. What are your options? How can you maneuver? So these are, I think, on everyone's kind of agenda anyway, right? But of course, what we're seeing now with the U.S. administration, it's causing a sense of urgency. Maybe it's triggering it, and I mean, in all fairness, maybe that's quite good actually, because companies needs to act on these things anyway, right? Sometimes you get a little bit of triggering and you get off at it, but there are rising costs out there on using things that you're not in control of, right? And you're clicking here and here and here. You've got the whole kind of on-demand pricing is just causing companies a lot of challenges, right? Because everything is just on demand, and usage goes up. You rarely see usage going down. So everything goes up. So you need to get in control of that, and that's there are different options,
But isn't that, sorry for jumping in, but isn't that also actually a benefit, right? We talk about plan B from that market change, right? But, and I never thought I would say this, but a constant such as price, which you kind of take for granted, infrastructure is a 10, 20-year investment. It's going to be very stable. But all of a sudden, price has actually become a very, very big topic, right? Things are going on with certain vendors. And like you're saying, it's easier to have this sprawl. And of course, if you have options and you can innovate on two different sides, you can also make sure you make those price a very important of that, characteristic that you want to choose from, so to speak. So it gives you options that you haven't had before. And being then on that maybe one vendor path might not be as flexible as we would like to,
Johan, Clear has signed with Eurostack.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
So Eurostack, there's been a lot of efforts in Europe to somehow catch up to other public cloud offerings and so forth. And I think Europe has felt for a long time like, shoot, maybe just like we want to build roads and railroads, maybe we also need to be able to build, some of this basic infrastructure. Again, as I said in the beginning there, we're running to build, to buy all this military equipment, but who's running the servers? Who's running the containers? Who's doing all that, right? So having some form of control, I think it's becoming apparent that we need to do that, right? So we've done a lot of efforts, and it really hasn't been successful. So this very smart lady, Christina Cafara, she started this effort, let's call it that, called Eurostack, where I think initially it was 120 companies that signed up, and now I think it's well over 250 companies, where ultimately, again, keyword is balance, right? Somehow finding a balance where, Mette sitting in that phone call with Trump, for example, she was terrified, it looked like in the interview afterwards, that's not a great feeling. So finding a balance, I think all of us citizens of Europe, we kind of want to have that balance, again, coming back to roads or anything else. So Eurostack is there to really a couple of things. One, there is a gap. How can we work differently in Europe to fill that gap? On that, there's a couple of things. There's a buy side, of course. Today we kind of easily choose something. Maybe we should choose differently, right? But there's also Europe, the way we work with grants and so forth. Maybe we should make investments towards this. We had Horizon 2020 and billions are going out to various things. Maybe we can make a focused effort here to make sure we do catch up to where somebody, just from a competitive perspective, would choose European cloud provider versus something else, because there's actually something great there. So that's what Eurostack is about, and I think it's going to continue here over 2025 to gain momentum. Large companies like Airbus, Dassault Systems, and they're also calling for this because they, as critical companies of Europe, they want to have that choice.
Can we catch up?
I am 100% sure, but it doesn't happen overnight. But if we want to do a focused effort, I think Europe has so much talent, so much power that, we've become a little bit complacent. We've become, I don't want to call it lazy, but, hey, listen, we can buy it instead of doing the hard work. I think we need to dig in and do the hard work. And again, U.S. is a partner, the world is a partner. I think that's the way we want to see it. But again, finding that balance is a good thing. I wrote an article about an Airbus project, right? So in the 60s, we started an Airbus project based on the same principles. We don't want necessarily to just buy from one place. We want to make sure that Europe can have some of these critical aspects. And that turned out to be a great thing. I think Europe can do that again, maybe in a different manner, but ultimately, you can catch up.
Catching up, I think it's going to be hard, if I would say, on these terms to catch up. But I think just after that, things are evolving as well as far as what architectures means, and we got AI agents. So I think we're going to see software being built in new ways than what it was before. And that creates also a new playing field as to how you do things. And in that playing field, I do think there is an ability to catch up. Whereas you may say, We're not putting everything in one place. We got one AI agent over here, which is using this data, and one over here. So it's and I don't know. I don't think anyone knows exactly what that playing field looks like today. But my point is just that if you're going to catch up on what we have right now, I think it's tough. But the future is going to be a bit different, and there the playing field is open, I think.
But let me give you an example then, right? So coming back, year 2000, I'm pretty sure none of us thought that, China would be the dominant car manufacturer. Today, I think we all have super respect, both from a quality perspective, all of those aspects, and they produce more cars than anybody else. They also produce the modern cars, the advanced cars. So, if you set your sights on it, because I completely agree, is that easy? No, it's not. But I think it's a must and something that we want to push for. Just from, again, it depends on what kind of society we want to let our kids grow up in.
About that, using global or American or other global cloud providers.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. You have to grab it on your own. If I just encrypt the data and control the keys, then I'm safe, right?
Is that a trick question?
Well, I can just say, so this is something that I have been doing with some organizations where they have taken the view that this is okay for them.
Yeah.
And I think this is important to note that it is, for many, I think it is a risk view, what you're prepared to do, what you consider to be okay for your risk. So from my perspective, I'm not in a position to say whether that's good enough or not, right? That it is a risk assessment of the company. That's I think is my political answer on that one.
Political answer.
Well, it is, because it's difficult to say yes or no. Like because one might say, what happens tomorrow? Who knows what decryption capabilities are out there? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
What can be read, what can't be read. I don't think anyone want to sign off on anything on that regard. But yeah, generally, it is of some people. You do risk assessment. You've got the strength of the keys. I'm the keeper of the keys. The data is encrypted. It's gonna So then you say that can't be read by anyone. So I'm good. That's a position you can take. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So you should, of course, encrypt everything, no matter where you are, just to make sure that you have that extra protection, right? So I think there are two things for the future. Encryption is one thing which has been there for forever, and then confidential computing will grow dramatically, right? So that in confidential computing, you make sure that the encryption goes all the way. I'm using the RAM, it's actually encrypted all the way there. I think the cloud providers will go more that route than talking that a cloud is sovereign or not. There's certainly aspects of regulatory that you have to comply with, right? But those two will be the future of how you protect that data. Now, let's just be very clear on the fact that data on a website, nobody cares about. It is public, right? So depending on the data you have, of course, is where you look at that. Now, if you take Scandinavia, right? If data from who owns real estate in Norway disappears, it will be a catastrophe. Nobody will understand anything, and it will be chaos, right? Well, that data is pretty darn important. Nobody can mess with that data. That might go way beyond trusting encryption and confidential computing, right? So then ultimately, we should probably have caves in Scandinavia where we have this data, locked in a way that nobody knows where it is, but it can be accessed in some shape or form. So you said it, right? It's always going to be a risk assessment, right? But I also believe today that maybe you want to look at it a little bit value-based as well. Businesses, of course, go straight into something just from a profit perspective, and maybe there are other values in the market that we see today, but that will continue to be a big part forward. And last but not least, the U.S. is great at so many things, right? So one can always ask the question, like NSA, how long time will it take for that encryption to be broken? And somebody else, right? We see it's kind of funny, right? All data almost end up hacked somewhere all the time, right? So let's have a little bit of a balance with that.
Yeah, and we were discussing this also, before that it's a very difficult regulatory area to decipher for the companies, because there are all the EU, there's a Schrems, there's a guy, and who said what, and what someone interprets something, and if if you really want to make something happen, you can probably interpret it in one way or the other way, right? So it's
Risk assessment.
I don't envy companies, having to tackle this, because it's hard. Yeah.
Beginning to wrap this up.
Yeah.
This is the first webinar we arrange on this topic, and I'm pretty sure that we will get back regarding the same topic.
Yeah.
Actually, geopolitical happenings, or
Something
the
could
actions
happen
going
tomorrow,
Yeah.
You never know.
I'm pretty sure it will be.
Well, this afternoon maybe.
Yeah,
exactly.
right. So we will get back on this topic, but three key takeaways from you two, and I'm starting with you, Matthias.
Control. Act now. Plan B. And know what your European cloud option looks like.
Can you take them once more?
Get control. Visibility. Where's my data? What's my risk?
Yep.
Establish your options. Plan B. And know what your European cloud option look like. Okay. For you.
Yep. Yeah. Johan?
Man, that was quick. I'm falling in line with that a little bit, right? Again, I said it before. I think resilience and flexibility is something that we need to work on, right? Without losing your ability to innovate, right? So speed is always going to be there, but that flexibility, we don't have it. So taking a look at that, I agree wholeheartedly with you. It's easy to look at these things and say, yeah, we're going to do that. We're all so busy in everyday life, right? And then now you got another thing you got to do, right? But I do think that starting now is an important piece, and prepare, because normally these things take quite a bit of time. Moving things and so forth is key, right? And then third, if I may become a little bit more philosophical, if I'm allowed to be that, we all contribute to the society that we live in, right? And that goes for, of course, our government agencies, but also us, the private companies, right? And we're all seeing a world that's actually, in my mind, I've never seen anything like it. A little bit scary sometimes, in all honesty, and to be truthful. And I got 3 kids, which I, of course, like most parents, want to make sure that they grow up in a strong Europe and competitive Europe, and the greatness of what we got in Scandinavia, so to speak, right? So sometimes, and I just throw it out there for whatever it's worth, sometimes, maybe we want to do value-based choices, because the choices that we make every day are choices that are going to shape the future of our continent, of Scandinavia, and so forth, right? And those choices do not always have to be, this is the easiest, most profitable, whatever. We talk about the environment, right? The environment. Shoot. I'm worried about that too now. So those are, of course, many times not like I can make more money here. You got to actually invest in that. And I think this is a moment of truth for Europe to say, you know what? It's good for my business, but it's also good for that society that I like to play in going forward for the next generation. So a little philosophical there at the end, but yeah.
Before we end the session for today, anything to add?
No, looking forward to having more of these, and I'm hoping that maybe next webinar we can also do some concrete actions on this. Show some things, and I think that there's a lot in Europe that we can show that shows that offer.
In a webinar like this, what can we show?
Well, so from our perspective, right, of course, there's plenty of players out there, so don't want to push one thing or the other. But I think it's important to understand what's out there, right? So I think that we can show, for example, the public cloud of Europe. We have compliant cloud. What's the differences? How do I play them? How does that play into AI? How do I get a Kubernetes cluster managed quickly in European clouds? And how that plays out in my journey towards creating more value for my customer, in conjunction, of course, with potential other public clouds that you have, Balance.
Matthias?
Yeah, because if you look at our client base of Ever, we have them across all these providers, right? So it is a balance, and it is about finding where things are best placed in line with what we've discussed here today. So those are things I think it's worth coming back to. We are talking to many of our clients now on these topics. There is actually quite a high demand for wanting to talk to us on these topics.
Yeah, very much so.
We are, not to be too bold, but we're pretty good at it. We have experience. We've done it for a while, and we have Klura, the cloud platform, also in our portfolio. So we've been on this journey for a while, and we can help clients in this difficult area. And looking forward to continuing this, both in having these sessions, but also talking to clients, and maybe bringing some of our clients to a webinar like this. I think it would be good.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Matthias, did you have?
No.
Okay. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all out there joining us today on this really, really high interest topic.
That's right.
We will get back to you all with the sequence of this.
Yeah, sounds good.
The next episode, I guess.
Yeah.
But with that said, thank you very much for today.
Thanks so much.
And goodbye.
Thanks.